When you feel like you're on the outside, focus on the inside. But this is pulled from John chapter 7, and the only way I can explain it to you is to jump into that text. So my prayer for all of us today, no matter which campus you're at, no matter if you're watching online, you're here at Perrysburg, my prayer for all of us is that John 7 would kind of come to life in the same way it did for me. Because I've read this chapter many, many times, and it's never come to life in the way that it did over this past month. So that's my prayer for all of us at all of our campuses, that we would really experience God through his word today. So we're going to jump in to John chapter 7, verse 1. John writes, after this, two simple words, but have a lot going on in there. If you're like me, you would have read this, and the next part, you would have just kind of breezed through it. But it's important. It's referring to something that happened before. John is saying something happened, and it's going to be really related to what's going to happen next. So we got to go backwards to John chapter 6 to figure out what happened. So what is the this referred to? Well, if you read John chapter 6, there's a bunch of stuff that happens there, and what we need to know is a couple pieces of context. First, Jesus had a bunch of people who were following him at the time. Tons of people. He would call those, we'll put them over here, his disciples, right? Bunches of people. And then he had a second group of people called the 12 disciples. And these were closer to him. He'd give them more responsibility. He'd teach them more intentionally. And then he'd have the three, his inner circle. John, our author today, is a part of that inner circle. And so, in John chapter 6, he tells us that Jesus starts teaching some pretty controversial stuff about communion, stuff that kind of, in as many words, freak people out. And so a bunch of the people in that outer circle, the disciples, they just left. They're like, I'm done, I can't do this anymore, because Jesus was saying some pretty radical stuff, and you can read it on your own, and some controversial things. So they start leaving him. So Jesus loses a bunch of followers, and that's what this is referring to. So as we step into this, we know that Jesus is already losing a bunch of people. John continues and writes, Jesus traveled around Galilee. He wanted to stay out of Judea, where the Jewish leaders were plotting his death. That's the totality of verse 1. So verse 1, in one verse, we find out that Jesus loses a bunch of his followers and now has the most powerful people in Jerusalem, the Jewish leaders. They want him dead.